Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the community of independent thinkers. The mainstream media is selling you a dangerous delusion. They tell you the war in the Middle East is on track. They count the number of destroyed missiles and call it a victory. But let's look at the naked truth. What we are witnessing is not a military victory. It is strategic suicide. It is a ruthless repetition of the catastrophic mistakes the foreign policy elite has stumbled into time and time again over the past 3 decades. Look at the current situation. We are entering the third week of a war against Iran that the American president voluntarily chose to launch. The Pentagon is proudly boasting about the destruction they've caused. Officials claim that the greatest military achievement of the U.S.-Israel coalition so far is wiping out much of Iran's missile arsenal, its air defenses, and crippling its navy. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth even boldly declared that the U.S. military has achieved total air dominance. He says Iran has no air defenses, no air force, and no navy. Their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dead. Over 2,100 people have died since the war began. Among them, more than 348 Iranian civilians have been killed as of Wednesday, according to the country's UN representative. 13 American soldiers have been killed in action. These numbers are presented as trophies, but this is the fatal hubris of power. Washington believes that destroying conventional military hardware equates to obliterating a nation's capacity to resist. Dead wrong. In an anarchic world, states backed into a corner will never surrender meekly. They act on the instinct of survival. They fight with everything they have. The destruction of Iran's conventional forces has absolutely not eliminated its capacity to sow chaos. Facing the massive American war machine, Iran has pivoted to asymmetric warfare. They use cyberspace, activating teams of hackers to strike targets in the U.S. and Israel. The systems of Stryker Corporation, an advanced medical equipment maker in Michigan, were brought down by a hacker group called Handala. This group claimed it was retaliation for a U.S. Tomahawk missile strike that hit a primary school in southern Iran, killing 175 people, mostly children. Further away, the ghosts of terrorism are beginning to appear right in the American heartland. From a shooting at a university in Virginia to a vehicle ramming into a Reform synagogue in Michigan. These are not random incidents. This is the core mechanism of asymmetric attrition warfare. When your adversary cannot defeat you on an open battlefield, they bring the battlefield into your home. But the most devastating weapon isn't found in cyber attacks. The most devastating weapon is the global economy. America is facing a brutal structural reality, dependence on energy supply chains. Despite Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's assertion that Iran's ability to threaten maritime traffic was nothing to worry about, the reality is that the Strait of Hormuz is now almost entirely shut down. Iran only needs a tiny asymmetric advantage to strangle global trade. The dynamic here is crystal clear. Even if the Iranian Navy has been largely sunk, it only takes a single Iranian soldier or militia member zipping across the narrow strait in a speedboat, firing a mobile missile, or attaching a limpet mine to the hull of a slow-moving supertanker, and the consequences are enough to shake the globe. Tanker owners are refusing to risk traversing the strait, ignoring the American president's call to show some guts. Analysis shows at least 16 oil tankers and commercial ships had been attacked in the Persian Gulf by Thursday. Oil is hovering around $100 a barrel, and maritime insurance premiums are surging. Washington is panicking under this material pressure. To alleviate price hikes, the U.S. even had to suspend sanctions against some Russian oil sales. This is a silent surrender. The American president had to take to social media to appeal for China, France, Japan, South Korea, and Britain to send naval forces to secure the strait. He demanded these 5 nations send ships to the area so the Strait of Hormuz would no longer be threatened by a nation that has been totally decapitated. The bitter irony here is that America is begging for backup from allies it largely did not consult before deciding to plunge into this war. Just a week ago, Washington arrogantly told the British Prime Minister not to bother sending aircraft carriers because the U.S. don't need people that join wars after we've already won. This reversal is not a communication error. This is the collapse of a strategic delusion. America has trapped itself. This brings us to the root cause of the tragedy, the manipulation of a great power's grand strategy by a minor ally. Look at the internal political dynamics and the alliance trap playing out. Severe strains are appearing between Washington and Israel. The Israeli leadership sold Washington a fairy tale that if the Iranian security establishment and supreme leader were eliminated, anti-government protests would erupt. They painted a picture of a color revolution. The American president bought into it, even calling on the Iranian people to take over their government on the morning of the opening attack. But reality has delivered a sledgehammer blow to the naive. Over the past 2 weeks, only pro-government rallies have been seen in Tehran's major squares. An emboldened theocracy is still in power, seemingly commanded by the late Ayatollah's son, and they are swearing to continue deploying asymmetric capabilities. The besieged militias tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps are ready to kill anyone who dares to rise up. The divergence in agendas between the U.S. and Israel is a death warrant for regional stability. U.S. Central Command warned Israel against striking large oil tanks outside the Iranian capital for fear of triggering retaliation against regional energy targets. But the Israeli Prime Minister ignored that advice and launched airstrikes on the depots, triggering massive blazes and a surge in oil prices. White House officials believe the Israeli leader wanted dramatic scenes of destruction to cause internal chaos within the Iranian leadership. But the actual result was simply more Iranian drone strikes targeting oil refining and storage facilities in neighboring Arab states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Plumes of smoke rose from a major oil trading port in the UAE following a drone attack. These strikes led to a halt in oil loading at Fujairah, one of the region's largest export terminals. When a great power allows a small ally to drag it into a vortex of conflict, that great power is severing its own economic lifeblood. Now, let's shift our strategic empathy to the third parties watching this entire tragedy unfold. While America burns money and blood in the dust of the Middle East, its only true peer competitor is smiling. That is China. Strategic planners in Beijing are learning an invaluable lesson. This war was expected to last 4 to 6 weeks, meaning it will cast a dark shadow over the crucial summit in Beijing at the end of March. Instead of focusing on containing China's growing power, America is distracted. Last year, the Chinese president used his control over critical rare earth minerals to force the American president to back down on tariffs. In 2025, China purchased about 1.4 million barrels of Iranian oil per day, accounting for over 13% of its seaborne oil imports. China is overwhelmingly Iran's biggest customer. As America bogs itself down, Beijing simultaneously secures its dominance in the Western Pacific and holds massive economic leverage. And Washington is standing at a brutal crossroads where every option leads to disaster. Either begin to pull back without achieving the core objectives, or sink deeper through ground operations. If they choose to pull back, a stockpile of near-bomb-grade nuclear fuel remains sitting inside Iranian territory. If they choose to push forward, America must seize Karg Island, Iran's largest oil export port, potentially using the Marines. But seizing this island requires protecting an occupying force, exposing them to attacks from the remnants of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. This would create exactly the kind of continuing military presence that the American president's own political base warned against and that he himself said he would never repeat. Even worse is the task of dealing with the 970 pounds of near-bomb-grade uranium believed to be stored in deep tunnels in Isfahan. Western intelligence agencies watching the plant by satellite say there is no evidence the fuel has been removed. This uranium, enriched to 60%, exists in gas form inside canisters. Extracting them requires special operations forces to infiltrate stealthily or go in with a huge protective force, spending days or weeks carefully extracting the canisters. There is little room for error. If the canisters are pierced and moisture enters them, the result is both highly toxic and radioactive. If they are kept too close together, there is a risk of triggering a critical nuclear reaction. The U.S. Secretary of State alluded to an immensely risky ground operation to retrieve this material. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is more desperate than ever, and they may view keeping that nuclear fuel as the ultimate leverage to force the U.S. to back off. This is the price of ignoring the laws of realism. States do not act out of goodwill, they act for survival. The Western elite thought they could reshape an entire region with firepower from the air, all while protecting their wallets back home. They were wrong. The American economy is bleeding. Energy supply chains are shattering. Alliances are fracturing due to selfish calculations. America is fleeing into a pile of ashes it lit itself. The future is remarkably bleak, and this war of attrition will drain the material power of the West, while the real adversaries steadily rise in the East. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop questioning the lies of power. The brutal truth is still out there. I will see you next time.